The tragic story of Lamu serves as a grim reminder that relationships with cruel or narcissistic individuals can never lead to anything good. It's vital to recognize the warning signs early and end such relationships before disaster strikes. Emotional abuse often marks the beginning, a precursor to physical violence that abusers use to assert control, dominate their partners, and instill an environment of fear and oppression. Today's story focuses on Lamu, a beloved Chinese blogger whose heartbreaking death shocked the entire nation. Coming from a humble background, Lamu won the hearts of many with her warmth, authenticity, and deep love for nature. Tragically, her life was cut short by the very person she once loved. The most horrifying aspect of this tragedy was that the attack was streamed live, leaving thousands of her followers to witness the nightmare unfold in real time, powerless to intervene. Lamu was born in 1990 in Yawa, located in the Tibetan and Chang Autonomous Prefecture of Sichuan Province, China. She was the youngest of 3 children in an impoverished family that struggled to survive. Growing up with her older sister and stepbrother, she lived in a modest home shared with their parents and grandmother. To make a living, the family gathered rare medicinal herbs and sold them to local pharmacies for a small income. Lamu attended school only up to the 3rd grade before leaving to help support her family. Together with the adults, she would trek into the mountains, often at specific times and to hidden spots, to collect rare plants and flowers known for their healing qualities. Lamu became highly knowledgeable about these herbs and developed a deep affection for nature. She found peace and inspiration in the mountains, cherishing their beauty and abundance. As social media gained popularity, Lamu decided to create her own account on a Chinese platform similar to TikTok. There, she shared short videos that captured her everyday life, household chores, and the breathtaking scenery of her home province. Calling herself a mountain girl, Lamu poured genuine love into her work. Unlike many influencers, she wasn't seeking fame. Fame found her. Her followers were drawn to her natural charm, radiant smile, and childlike sincerity. Lamu's content was never staged or rehearsed. She spoke from the heart, often singing folk songs while filming the serene mountain landscapes around her. She never used makeup or beauty filters, choosing instead to show her authentic self. Her calloused hands and scarred feet told the real story of her life, one marked by hard work, resilience, and an unbreakable bond with the land she loved. Over time, Lamu's following steadily increased, and she became well known not only among locals but also among tourists visiting the region. People affectionately referred to her as the sweet mountain girl, offering kind words, expressing appreciation for her videos, and often asking to take photos with her. Though Lamu never sought fame or felt pride in her popularity, she was genuinely happy that her work touched others' hearts and brought them happiness. In her younger years, Lamu frequently ventured into the mountains with her parents and older sister. But as time passed, her sister married and moved to another province, and her aging parents could no longer endure the demanding climbs. Lamu then took on all the work herself. She shared with her followers her deep knowledge of local flora, describing the healing properties of various herbs and flowers, explaining how to gather them properly, and teaching how to use them safely as food. During certain seasons, Lamu would spend weeks alone in the mountains collecting medicinal plants. She filmed how she set up camp for the night, cooked simple meals over an open fire, and recounted local legends and traditions. When she returned home, her backpack was often so full it seemed heavier than she was. Yet, despite the hard labor and isolation, Lamu never inspired pity. Her strength, courage, and love for her work shone through. She radiated happiness whenever she was surrounded by the mountains she so deeply cherished. Despite returning tired, worn out, and with bloody calluses, and despite never complaining about her tough fate and hard daily labor, Lamu long avoided one topic. She did not discuss her personal life because she suffered for many years at the hands of her abusive husband, Tongli, enduring beatings and humiliations. But she tried not to show that she was deeply unhappy. Tongli was also a native of Sichuan Province, born in 1990 into a simple and quite modest family. His parents adored their youngest son, indulging him from an early age, always striving to spoil and please him. At the age of 12, He quit school and started working as a courier, delivering groceries to local stores. He earned little but kept all the money to himself, not helping his family at all. Even then, the teenager began to show signs of greed, avarice, and narcissism. He believed the world revolved around him, that others owed him, but he owed nothing to anyone, desperate to become wealthy. He was willing to do anything, even break the law, and that's precisely what happened. At 15, Tong left home, fell in with the wrong crowd, and began dealing in banned substances and petty theft. He also dabbled in gambling and took pride in getting away with it. He aimed to earn respect in the criminal underworld, become rich, and escape the poverty he grew up in. Sometime later, Lee's parents opened their own small spice and tea shop, investing all their efforts and resources into it. The business quickly took off, generating a decent income, and the family soon became well off by local standards. At that point, Tong decided to return home and offered to help expand and promote the family business. In reality, he just wanted to live off his relatives, who worked hard daily. Tong considered himself successful and wealthy, spending money on personal luxuries, boasting to friends about his expensive items, and behaving selfishly, even claiming the store's success as his own. Meanwhile, he kept in touch with local criminals, maintaining a separate under-the-table business with them. First love. Tong and Lamu met when they were just 17. The young man was so enchanted by her beauty, kindness, and sincerity that he was head over heels in love. He courted her earnestly, giving gifts, and it seemed he was ready to change for her, become more mature and serious, and cut ties with the criminal world. The young and naive Lamu quickly fell for his charms, believing she had met her Prince Charming with whom she would be happy. No one had ever courted her so diligently before, and no one had tried so hard to win her over. Soon, the young couple developed a romantic relationship that lasted almost 2 years before they decided to make it official. As soon as Tong turned 19, he proposed to his beloved, who eagerly accepted. However, their parents were not thrilled about their decision to marry. They tried to dissuade the young couple, believing they were too young to start a family. But the young lovers wouldn't listen to anyone. In 2009, they got married, and the newlywed wife moved into her mother-in-law's house, Lamu's personal hell. Initially, married life seemed quite blissful. Tong tried to be a good husband, left behind his bad influences and gambling, focusing on his young wife and the family business. Lamu took on almost all the household duties and also helped her beloved's parents in their shop. It wasn't long before her husband started disappearing with his old friends again. He returned to his unlawful activities, frequently consumed alcohol, and his behavior towards his wife drastically changed. Tong was no longer the gentle, kind, and caring man Lamu had fallen in love with a few years earlier. He became crude, self-centered, and aggressive. He took a portion of the store's earnings from a business where all the family members worked except for him, claiming it as his share, and spent all the money on his own needs, entertainments, and pleasures. The couple started arguing frequently. Lamu tried to reason with her husband, urging him to get his act together, work honestly, quit drinking, and stop associating with people from the criminal world. But Tong wouldn't listen to either his wife or his mother, believing no one had the right to tell him what to do. According to his parents' recollections, conflicts in their home became a daily occurrence. The situation didn't change even when Lamu became pregnant. Her husband continued to vanish with his friends, and when he returned home, he was rough and aggressive. He was annoyed that his wife was now more focused on herself and their future child. He himself, like a child, demanded attention, and during one disagreement, he raised his hand to her for the first time. Lamu was shocked by her husband's action and declared she would return to her parents' home as she refused to tolerate such treatment. At that moment, her mother-in-law, who had unintentionally witnessed the incident, intervened. She approached her son and slapped him twice, telling him he had no right to treat the mother of his future child that way. Afterwards, the woman convinced her daughter-in-law to stay, promising that it would not happen again. Lamu believed her and decided to give her husband another chance, a decision she would bitterly regret as it was just the beginning of a real nightmare. From then on, Tong regularly became physically abusive, only to apologize afterward, crying and begging her not to leave him. Each time, Lamu wanted to believe he had come to his senses and would genuinely change, but the cycle repeated over and over. When she finally decided to leave her husband, he threatened to take their son away and do something terrible to her and her parents. Frightened, the young mother stayed, fearing he would carry out his threats. From then on, their child became his main tool for manipulation and blackmail. Lamu told none of her relatives about the nightmare unfolding in her husband's home. Even her older sister, with whom she had been very close since childhood, suspected nothing. In 2012, after a long and severe illness, Lamu's mother passed away, which was a huge shock for her. Her elderly father and grandmother were left virtually helpless, and she found herself literally living between two homes, managing to maintain order, cook, and help with the household chores everywhere. Meanwhile, Lamu continued to regularly climb the mountains for herbs to financially support both families. Only in the mountains, amidst the hard work, paradoxically, could she rest, be alone with her thoughts, and breathe freely without fear of her disgruntled husband coming home, causing a scene and hitting her again. In 2017, the woman gave birth to a second son. Relations with her husband remained strained, and her mother-in-law had long stopped trying to intervene on her daughter-in-law's behalf, though she took on all the care of the grandchildren when Lamu went to work in the mountains. Around the same time, Lamu created her account on Douyin, Chinese TikTok, where she started posting short videos showcasing the local beauty, discussing various flowers and herbs, their medicinal properties, and how to use them. Engaging with her audience became the outlet Lamu desperately needed to keep from going insane. Sometimes she quietly sang songs for her followers, and sometimes danced against the backdrop of mountain ridges. She always appeared happy, smiling genuinely, and never once complained to her audience about her difficult fate or mentioned the domestic violence she regularly endured. In 2019, Lamu's beloved grandmother passed away, and the blogger posted a video for the first time where she was crying, expressing her deep pain over losing a family member. Her numerous followers sincerely supported her, unlike her husband, who instead of showing sympathy became furious and struck her face because she was sobbing. In January 2020, after enduring another severe incident of violence, Lamu finally decided to leave her tyrannical husband. She took her sons, moved back to her parents' home, and filed for divorce. Around the same time, Lamu recorded a new video stating that for the first time in a long while, she felt calm and confident. In the video, it was evident she tried to cover up a large bruise under her eye with concealer. However, she never disclosed to anyone the domestic abuse she had suffered for years. Regrettably, during the divorce proceedings, the court divided custody of the sons, leaving the younger child with the mother and the older with the father. This decision was a devastating blow for Lamu, and her now ex-husband unexpectedly changed tactics by romantically pursuing her again, proposing they start over and not break up the family. He swore he had realized his mistakes, wanted them and the boys to live together again, and promised to acknowledge all his past errors and never repeat them. For a couple of months, Tong put on the act of a repentant man. He gave flowers, created real celebrations for the family, tried to help his ex-wife around the house, and even joined her on mountain trips, which he had never done before. Lamu's heart softened, and she believed that he had genuinely changed. By the end of March, the couple remarried. As you might guess, the fairy tale ended as soon as Lamu returned to her husband's house. Tong reverted to being cruel, mean, and selfish, and within 2 weeks of remarrying, he brutally attacked his wife, nearly beating her to death. When Lamu interacted with her followers, he snatched the phone from her hands and hurled it against the wall, shattering it. Then he began to beat her with his fists and feet, giving her no chance to escape. Battered and barefoot, Lamu fled the house and immediately went to the police, seeking protection. But they only took her statement and advised her to try to resolve the family conflict on her own. After that, Lamu decided to hide from her husband in another village to avoid endangering her relatives. Enraged, her husband was ready to end the life of his runaway wife, but did not know where to find her. He assumed she might have gone to her sister's house. He visited the sister's home and began yelling, demanding she tell him where Lamu was. The woman knew nothing about it and asked him to leave. Then Tong repeatedly struck her in the face with all his might. At that moment, her husband was at work, so there was no one to protect the unfortunate woman. She suffered a fractured cheekbone and eye socket, and her nose was broken. After the second victim also filed a police report, Tong was finally held accountable administratively, but he was not arrested. Nevertheless, Tong laid low while the second divorce proceedings were underway, not attempting to contact his wife. Unfortunately, this time around, the court, in dissolving the marriage, left both sons with the father, as the Lee family was wealthy, and money proved to be the deciding factor. The heartbroken mother was crushed with grief. Her close ones urged her to leave the village for a while, fearing the ex-husband would seek revenge and possibly do something dreadful. However, Lamu refused, wanting to be near her boys. 3 weeks after the second divorce, Lamu went to the mountains, where she recorded a video of herself singing and dancing. Apparently, this was her way of trying to relieve stress, but her ex-husband interpreted it as her celebrating their separation, which blinded him with rage. On the evening of September 14th, 2020, around 8, Lamu started a live stream to chat with her followers. She was dressed in a traditional Tibetan outfit, softly singing folk songs. She put a finger to her lips, whispering that they needed to be quiet because her father and visiting stepbrother were already asleep while she prepared breakfast treats for them. At that moment, a terrible noise erupted off camera, as if someone had kicked the door in. The blogger turned pale, frozen in fear, her eyes wide with horror. She stared at the person entering, then suddenly jumped up, clearly trying to escape. The tripod with her smartphone fell camera down, but the broadcast continued. Viewers could not see what was happening in the room but could hear everything. Heavy footsteps were heard, followed by the sound of a liquid splashing on the floor and walls. Lamu started screaming for help. Then her father's voice pleaded with the intruder to calm down and put down the knife. Lamu warned her family that the room was doused in gasoline and begged them to save themselves. A sinister silence fell for a few seconds, then the click of a lighter followed by a piercing scream was heard. The broadcast cut off as the crackle of flames spreading through the room intensified. Followers were in disbelief, unwilling to accept that they had witnessed a tragedy, with some even speculating it was a cruel prank. Unfortunately, the worst had occurred. Tong decided to brutally exact revenge on his ex-wife for daring to leave him. He rode a motorcycle to Lamu's house, bringing along a canister of gasoline and a large knife. Through the windows, he saw his ex-wife in the kitchen on the ground floor and kicked the door leading to the room. Tong caught Lamu off guard. She barely understood what was happening before she tried to flee, but he prevented her from escaping. Tong doused Lamu with fuel and wounded her with the knife before setting the house on fire. At that moment, her father and brother ran outside, shouting for neighbors to help, but they did not understand what was happening or the seriousness of the situation. As the flames erupted, her relatives rushed back into the house, but the old wooden beams, burning like torches, collapsed, blocking the entrance. It took firefighters about 2 hours to extinguish the fire. When they entered, they found Lamu in the room, her skin charred black and in places literally melted and stuck to the floor. Incredibly, Lamu was still breathing with a faint pulse detectable. She was immediately rushed to the hospital, where doctors were horrified by her condition. Over 90% of her body surface was burned and her lungs had nearly cooked from the heated air and smoke. She desperately continued to fight for her life. She was in a deep coma and her condition was deemed critical. Nevertheless, the city's burn center was prepared to help, but the treatment cost was a staggering $1,000,000, a sum her family could not afford after losing everything in the fire. Then, Lamu's father decided to seek help from her followers. He wrote a letter explaining that her ex-husband had attacked her, attempting to end her life, but she had survived, and doctors held out a slim hope. However, the family simply didn't have the funds for her medical treatment. The letter was posted on her social account, along with a plea from her sister to all compassionate people to help Lamu, providing an account number for donations. The necessary funds for treatment were raised within an hour of the post, and people continued to send money. Lamu was transferred to the burn center, where she received the needed care. Her condition was stabilized, and at one point it even seemed she might recover. However, tragically, after 2 weeks of fighting for her life, her heart could not endure any longer, and she passed away without regaining consciousness. She was only 30 years old. At the trial, Tong's mother desperately defended her son, who had inflicted such cruelty, claiming that he did it out of intense love for his ex-wife and stress from their divorce. Nevertheless, the verdict was severe and just. The court found Lee guilty of deliberate, cruel deprivation of life and sentenced him to death, additionally mandating his family to compensate Lamu's relatives for the property loss due to the house fire. Tong attempted to appeal the verdict several times through appellate motions, but the decision remained unchanged. In July 2022, the sentence was carried out. Tong Lee was executed that same year, 2 years after the tragic event that ended a young woman's life. Her relatives rebuilt the house on the site of the burned one and were able to move back in. On the ground floor, her sister set up a small memorial altar with photographs of Lamu. The court left the orphaned boys in the custody of their paternal grandparents. The Lee family remained one of the wealthiest in the village, and the judges believed they could provide the children with better living conditions. Born on May 5, 1976, Sonia Mejia achieved the American dream at a young age. By 2006, at the age of 29, she was living with her common-law husband and her 8-year-old son and was 6 months pregnant with her second child. They lived in the Pleasant Fairway Apartments, located at approximately 11th West and 3900 South in Taylorsville, Utah, to support her family. She worked part-time at a local McDonald's, but the dream would be shattered one fateful morning in early February 2006. Sonia was home alone on February 9, 2006. At around 6 p.m., her husband returned home from work and made a gruesome discovery. He called the authorities after finding his wife breathless and unresponsive on the floor. The crime scene clearly pointed towards a homicide, which investigators concluded to be a robbery gone wrong. An autopsy on Sonia's body later showed that she had been sexually assaulted before being killed by strangulation. Tragically, Sonia's 24-week-old fetus also did not survive. Multiple items were missing from the apartment, which included 3 pieces of jewelry that belonged to Sonia: a heart-shaped ruby ring, a diamond ring, and a religious pendant fastened to a gold chain. Her car, a gold 4-door Ford Escort, was also stolen from the apartment and was located 4 days later in the parking lot of the Fairfield Inn at 590 West and 4500 South. Unidentified fingerprints and DNA evidence were discovered inside her apartment in the form of a bag of Cheetos and a Coke bottle, items that were not supposed to be there. So, investigators concluded that they must have belonged to the killer. Unexpectedly, the investigators found a witness after interrogating neighbors for information. At around 11:30 a.m. on the day of the murder, a neighbor saw a Hispanic male talking to Sonia at the front door of her residence. The witness then observed him entering the apartment and assaulting Sonia. The man grabbed Sonia by the throat and struck her with such force that she fell to the floor, and then the assailant kicked the door shut. Sadly, even after witnessing the violent attack, the neighbor failed to alert the authorities, which ultimately cost the young mother her life. The man was described as a short-haired Hispanic male with a medium build, approximately 5 feet 6 inches in height and 20 to 29 years in age. Though it was deemed enough evidence to identify a suspect, police were unable to do so despite having fingerprints and a physical description of a killer. The authorities believed it to be a random attack until 2 years later, when the killer struck again on the same day and in the same area. Damiana Castillo was born in Mexico City, Mexico on March 18, 1950. Little is known about her early life, but she was a loving mother and grandmother. She was known to have a very gentle attitude and shared kind words and blessings with everyone she crossed paths with. One neighbor described her as a prompt lady who had never been late for work and never forgot to attend church. Her 2 children, 1 son and 1 daughter, and her 5 grandchildren adored her to death. In 2008, 57-year-old Damiana lived at an apartment at 4000 South Redwood Road in Salt Lake City, Utah. just a mile from where Sonia Mejia used to live. Sadly here too, on a tragic February morning, police would be called to witness a horrific crime scene. On February 9, 2008, Damiana's son went to check up on his mother after she did not show up at church like she did every Sunday. There, poor Damiana was lying in her apartment, partially covered with a pillow with ligature marks on her neck. Police noted the signs of a fight in the apartment, including an overturned Damiana's pocketbook and wallet were found abandoned on a couch, and her jewelry box had also been disturbed. DNA was collected from the victim's neck, while a latent fingerprint was found on her purse. At first, this murder was believed to be a separate attack similar to Sonia's. However, excluding the age factor, these two murders had extreme similarities between them. But from 2009, investigators conclusively believed that it was the deeds of one person after the biological evidence linked both slayings. Nonetheless, both cases could not be solved at the time due to the DNA and fingerprints not matching a person present on the criminal database. In 2010, prosecutors used the DNA profile to charge the unknown suspect with 2 counts of aggravated murder, referring to him as John Doe, since his identity could not be specified. The killer earned his name as the February 9th killer, indicating the date of the crimes. Though the killer was not considered a serial killer, for years, police in West Valley City and Taylorsville would have extra officers on patrol on February 9th, in order to prevent a third slaying. Over the years, these 2 cases received much-needed media attention, but no particular breakthrough could be earned through that. It would all change in 2016, when the FBI maintained automated fingerprint identification system reported that prints taken from the scene had been matched to a person, Juan Antonio Arreola Murillo. Arreola is a 41-year-old Mexican resident who was living in the U.S. in 2008. According to court records, was arrested by Salt Lake City police in July of the same year for a fraud and theft case and pleaded guilty. The address listed for Arreola in the 2008 case was the same apartment complex where Sonia was killed. However, he had multiple other addresses listed in court records, and it was unclear if Arreola was indeed a neighbor of either Sonia or Damiana. Arreola was deported from the U.S. back to his home country Mexico in October 2008 and has been living there since. 2017, prosecutors amended the John Doe charges and the court issued an arrest warrant for Arreola. Although the killer's identity was unfolded to the investigators, it was not public due to the suspect living in another jurisdiction. The charging documents were unsealed after he had been extradited to Utah from Mexico. He was charged with 3 counts of aggravated murder, 2 counts of aggravated burglary, and 1 count of aggravated robbery. If found guilty, he could face life in prison without the possibility of parole. Janet K. Yuri was born on May 14, 1953 as the only daughter of her parents, when Ford and Mary and Runyon. She grew up in a beautiful home in Tipton, Indiana with her 2 brothers. She graduated from Tipton High School in 1971 and focused on having a family. By 2004, 51-year-old Janet was living in Kokomo, Indiana, close to her daughter's place. She was a lab manager for 16 years at CNB Optical One in Kokomo and had been an excellent worker. And her daughter Carly Martin lived in separate houses in the same community on North Appleton Way in Kokomo. Carly's home was just across the street from Janet's place. This allowed Janet to play with her granddaughter, which was her favorite thing to do. She had several other hobbies, including doing yard work, spending time on her computer, listening to music, and wandering outdoors. Holidays were a massive deal to Janet. She loved having a feast with her own cooked dishes every holiday, even if the gathering was small. Turkey, salads, desserts, everything would be arranged by Janet to enhance the celebrations. The Thanksgiving of 2004 wasn't anything different either. The family planned a midday meal due to Carly's evening shift at work. The family was to meet at Janet's place and enjoy the Thanksgiving meal. So, on the eve of Thanksgiving, on November 25, 2004, Janet began preparing a large Thanksgiving meal at her home. Sadly, it would be the last thing she ever did. The following day, November 26, 2004, was Black Friday. Carly kept calling her mother after Janet missed the Thanksgiving dinner. Panic struck her when repeated calls were unanswered. She had a gut feeling that something terrible had happened. Growing concerned, she went to her mother's place to check in on her. The garage door of Janet's home was open. Carly unlocked the front door with a key and walked into her mother's home. There, 51-year-old Janet was lying, dead. The turkey was in the oven, which was still running. From the conditions of her body, it was apparent that she had been brutally murdered. With a broken heart and tears in her eyes, Carly called the police. The Kokomo Police Department arrived at the house a few minutes later. There was not much evidence to collect from the crime scene. Although some blood was found at the crime scene, it was not enough to build a DNA profile. Police theorized that Janet most likely did not know her attacker, but let them in for some reason. Preliminary reports suggested that a struggle had taken place between Janet and her attacker. From the fact that the food had been left half done, they also concluded that Janet had been dead from the day of Thanksgiving. The murder shocked the close-knit community of Kokomo. No one had any idea who would want to kill a sweet old lady who greeted everybody. The crime scene was not giving away anything either, although Janet's mourning family wanted nothing more than for her killer to be caught. With a lack of evidence, the investigation was not going anywhere. There were some sightings of a possible killer, as police found out in their investigation. Some neighbors had seen a white vehicle leaving the area at high speed around the time Janet was murdered. Still, the information did not lead the police anywhere. A ray of hope was seen 2 months after the murder, when police identified a person of interest. Danny Case, a resident of Peru, had reportedly been going door to door to call for a ride. He seemed like a possible killer after a previous report indicated that Danny had been wanted in Miami County on suspicion of murder. 2 months later, on January 25, 2005, investigators got a big break when Danny ended up being apprehended when he was arrested at Indianapolis International Airport on an outstanding warrant. But before Kokomo detectives could speak to him, he hung himself in his holding cell at the airport. According to Kokomo police, all the evidence pointed towards one man, Danny Case. However, there was insufficient physical evidence linking the deceased man to the crime. For years, people speculated the possibility of Danny being the killer of Janet, without ever coming to a conclusion. Perhaps the case would remain forever in the cold case files, if a witness had not come forward decades later. On January 14, 2022, Kokomo police announced the closure of Janet Yuri's murder case due to a recent break in the investigation. According to the police, an acquaintance of Danny Case had recently come forward and told investigators that Danny once confessed to him about killing an elderly woman on North Apperson, right where Janet lived. The acquaintance had further said that Danny knocked on the woman's door, asked about using her phone to call for a ride, and then killed her. In addition to Janet's death, Danny had also reportedly told the acquaintance that he had beaten an elderly man to death in Howard County. In light of this new information, Kokomo County investigators met with Yuri's family regarding the closure of Janet's case. After a lengthy conversation, the family finally agreed to officially close the case with an exceptional clearance due to the suspect being deceased. So, after 17 years, this cold case was solved with the perpetrator eluding mortal justice. We understand this is a difficult time for the family, as these conversations open the wounds that the senseless tragedy left with her family. A statement said in the press release, "Our condolences remain with Janet Yuri and her amazing family. We pray for peace for all of you." Mary Jane Thompson was born as the third daughter to her father Norman Thompson and mother Lenore in 1962. As the years went by, 2 more daughters would join the happy family from the small-town Cheektowaga in New York. From a young age, Mary Jane had big dreams of being a model. She used to dress up, walk, and even practice talking like a model, so she could one day be one. But that did not take away from her kind and thoughtful nature. After graduating from Cleveland High School, Mary Jean started her life afresh. From California to Houston to Los Angeles, she lived in all these big cities for short spells before ultimately deciding to begin a new chapter in Texas. The fourth of the 5 sisters, Selena Tomasalo, remembers the last Christmas she spent with Mary Jane before Mary relocated from her hometown. With her own money, Mary Jane got Selena a stereo system and their other sister Kathy a portable stereo called a boombox. gifts that were invaluable for those little girls. Still, they did not realize who purchased them until their sister moved away. The thought never crossed their mind that it would be the last holiday they would ever spend with Mary Jane. In 1983, a 21-year-old Mary Jane moved to Dallas, Texas, determined to fulfill her aspirations of being a model. Her dreams were indeed huge, but the young girl never hesitated to work hard for them. During the 6 months of living in Dallas, Mary was working 2 jobs, full-time in a florist supply shop and part-time in a local restaurant. However, most of her income went into paying for her acting and modeling classes, something she hoped would help her break into the industry. On February 11, 1984, at around 4:30 p.m., Mary Jane Thompson left her part-time job as a hostess at the restaurant near Lovers Lane and Greenway Drive. She took a bus to the Trinity Medical Clinic, located on the former Industrial Boulevard, to get a checkup for an ear infection. However, she was unable to do this as the clinic was closed. Tragically, that was the last time she was ever seen alive. 2 days later, on February 13, 1984, the authorities were called to a warehouse on the 2300 block of Irving Boulevard in the Stemmons corridor of Northwest Dallas, Texas. After a female body was discovered near the railroad tracks behind the warehouse, it was evidence upon inspecting the crime scene that this was a homicide. Police quickly identified the victim as 21-year-old Mary Jane by an ID card found in a nearby gym bag. The bag contained one leg warmer, while the other was wrapped around her throat. Her pants appeared to have been cut from her body. The body bore a bite mark and numerous other bruises. The autopsy confirmed that she was sexually assaulted and then strangled to death with her own leg warmer. Unknown bodily fluids were also found on the corpse and preserved for later usage. However, this evidence wouldn't come into play for a very long time, as DNA technologies were not as advanced in the 80s as they are today. As authorities were unsuccessful in gathering further clues, the case began to turn cold. Although neither investigators nor the family lost hope despite decades passing by, there were no fresh leads to follow up on. Her family always posted her pictures and spread her story to keep her memory alive. It wasn't until 2009 that any formal action could be taken in the progress of the investigation. Nearly 25 years later, in 2009, the Dallas Police Department reopened the case and male DNA was discovered on swabs taken from Mary Jane's autopsy. The DNA never matched a specific suspect, so the case went cold once again. In 2018, the police once again opened the cold case after Mary Jane's sister Selena called the investigators requesting a reinvestigation using new DNA technologies. The investigators worked with a team from the district attorney's office, while the FBI also joined the task force in 2020. In the same year, they began a thorough search on genealogical websites using new technology like ancestry databases to identify potential relatives of the suspect based on DNA collected at the crime scene. The search narrowed down to a single suspect, 60-year-old Edward Morgan. Morgan was just 22 years old in 1984 and was a familiar face in the area as he lived a few miles away from Mary Jane's workplace. To confirm their suspicions, the FBI agents then surveilled Morgan's West Dallas home for a week where he lived alone. On February 15, 2022, a Dallas police detective and an FBI agent grabbed the trash that Morgan had dumped in front of his house. From it, a soda bottle and 2 water bottles were sent to a lab to undergo forensic testing. The DNA from the bottles positively matched the DNA taken during the autopsy. On February 18, 2022, after 38 years, Morgan was arrested and charged with capital murder. Her family was grateful to the investigators who never stopped working on the case. The news brought closure to the family as they finally knew who was responsible for taking Mary Jane away from them. Selena wrote in a Facebook post, "I know you are looking down and happy that they finally got him." Sadly, their father, who wanted nothing more than to find his daughter's killer, did not see this day as he passed away in 2020. Morgan is currently being held in jail with his bail set at $500,000. Helen Burtbrook was a hardworking elderly woman who lived her life to the fullest until it was tragically cut short. Helen lived all by herself in a 2-bedroom apartment at the Garden Apartment Buildings in the Mojave Desert town of Apple Valley, California. She was a well-spoken, attractive, and respected lady in the community, and everyone had only good things to say about her. A tenant would later describe her as a cautious woman due to her living alone in the department. Helen was very dedicated to her work. For 20 long years, she worked for San Bernardino Valley College in the food services department. However, she later shifted to a different work line to experience other things in life. In 1985, Helen was working 2 jobs. She sold clothing at a fashion boutique called Lolo's in the Apple Valley. Admirably, 63-year-old Helen would model for the clothes that the store would put on fashion shows. She also worked as a bug keeper at a store right across Highway 18 at the bowling alley, which at the time was known as Gold Strike Lanes. On July 5, 1985, a Friday, Helen did not show up for work, an extremely unusual thing for her to do. Her boss called and called, but nobody answered. The concerned coworkers then called the sheriff's department for a welfare check. When officers drove down Highway 18 to the Garden Apartments, the door of Helen's apartment was unlocked. They found her lifeless body lying inside as they entered the scene. Not much evidence was present at the crime scene. However, DNA was collected from the scene, but nothing came of it since DNA technology was in its infancy back then. Autopsy results concluded that she died from strangulation by a nylon stocking. Despite conducting several interviews and polygraph tests, detectives could not identify a positive suspect, and the Apple Valley murder case remained unsolved for many years. In 2009, the case was re-examined and numerous items were sent for DNA testing. A DNA profile was developed for a suspect, but there were no matches in the DNA database. Then, in 2021, cold case homicide investigators reopened the case and conducted further analysis of the unidentified DNA profile. The testing produced positive results, identifying a suspect named Robert Eugene Wertman. Wertman was a former resident of Apple Valley who lived close to Highway 18. The name was not entirely unknown for the investigation. As a matter of fact, Wertman was considered a person of interest in the original investigation and was even interrogated at the time. Investigators learned that Wertman, then 37, met Helen in the days before her murder and returned to her apartment between July 3rd and July 5th. However, he claimed to have no knowledge of the crime and even denied going to the apartment. Due to a lack of evidence, investigators could not prove his involvement in the murder. As fate would have it, he didn't stay a free bird for long. In August 1985, just a month after he murdered Helen, Wertman was arrested on suspicion of attempting to rape a woman at the Cocky Bowl restaurant and bar on Highway 395 in Victorville. He also had a Sonoma County rape conviction from 1978, with an extensive sexually violent criminal history. Wertman died in prison in 1995 while serving a 22-year sentence in San Bernardino County. Viola Hagencourt was born on August 16, 1900 and grew up in a lovely home. Not much is known about her life. After divorcing her husband in 1928, she never remarried or even dated someone. It was before the Great Depression when the divorce occurred and Viola swore off men for the rest of her life. Despite loneliness, she never complained about anything in her life. She was known as a happy, generous, and friendly woman among family members and neighbors. In 1980, Viola was living in the Pebble Cove apartment complex located on the 2500 block of West Winton Road in Anaheim, California, after moving from her longtime home in Milwaukee. Apparently, her family believed that the apartment complex in Anaheim was a safer community for a lone woman, which was also closer to the family members. A decision that would come back to haunt them. Viola regularly chatted with other residents and visitors outside her apartment and was often seen walking around the building. One of her neighbors, who was a high school student at the time, found Viola very sweet and called her grandma. She often took cookies to the elderly woman. In the evening, she propped open her door with a Campbell's soup can, a worrisome habit for an elderly woman. According to some neighbors who thought it was unsafe, concerns would no longer be only concerns for the well-wishers of Viola in the early 1980s. A neighbor grew worried when Viola was not seen leaving her apartment for several days. They entered her apartment on February 18, 1980, only to make a horrific discovery. When authorities reached the scene, they found the elderly widow's body sprawled out on her bed. She was gagged with a torn pillow cover, which had been forced into her mouth. Multiple ribs of her body were broken due to a merciless beating. Blood stains were found on the bed under her pelvic area, and empty beer cans were found in the apartment. The cause of death was suffocation from the gag in her mouth. Although there were no marks of a forced entry into the apartment, signs of struggle were present in the bedroom. It was concluded that the old woman tried to fend off her assailant, but turned out to be no match for him. The medical examiner ruled that she was brutally raped before her demise, and semen was collected from the body. Viola was only 6 months shy of celebrating her 80th birthday when her life was ended in this heinous manner. However, the question of who raped and killed the elderly woman had no straight answer. Despite some physical evidence, investigators were far away from identifying possible suspects. Eventually, they would have to wait 4 decades before the mystery would be solved. As years went by, this case became one of the oldest cold cases in Anaheim City. In September 2020, the detectives decided to reopen the cold case. It was time to reinvestigate the case under the light of new DNA technologies, which had successfully brought closure to several decades-old unsolved cases across the country. With assistance from the Orange County Crime Lab and the FBI's Violent Crime Task Force using new DNA technologies, a possible suspect was finally identified. In 2021, the suspect in this horrendous crime was Andre William Lepere, a man who struggled with alcoholism throughout his life. Due to his alcoholism, he lasted only a year in the military as he was discharged following an alcohol-related car accident. Along with alcoholism, he also had a reputation for abuse. In 1980, Lepere and his wife separated, and she filed a restraining order against him. Lepere was not a complete stranger to Viola. Lepere's sister Denise lived in the same apartment complex where he lived for some time and met Viola a couple of times. Sometime in the 90s, Lepere moved to the east, living in several places including Washington, Wyoming, and Arizona, and New Mexico. There he worked as a truck driver as well as a plumber. He married twice, had 2 children, and went on to live his life peacefully until he was arrested in April 2021 from his Alamogordo home in New Mexico on the charge of murder. In the trial, Lepere said that his connection to Viola was much more than meeting a couple of times. He claimed that Viola seduced him, and they had consensual sexual encounters on 2 occasions, one shortly before the murder. He denied killing or beating her and said that she was alive and well and was even giggling when he came out from her apartment. Though his current wife, sister, and stepson didn't believe that he was capable of killing someone. His story of being seduced sounded ridiculous and the jury did not buy it. On May 13, 2022, a 65-year-old Andre William Lepere was convicted of the murder and sentenced to life imprisonment for the murder of 79-year-old Viola Hagencourt in 1980. With a resolution after 41 years, Viola's family said in a statement, "Our grandmother, Viola Clara, was a beautiful, happy soul and did not deserve being violated in her final years of life. They were grateful that the killer was brought to justice." The case of Lacey Peterson. Lacey Rocha was born on May 4, 1975 to Sharon and Dennis, but her parents divorced when she and her older brother Brent were still young. After the divorce, Lacey's mother married Ron, a dairy farmer, who became a father figure to her and played a significant role in her upbringing. Lacey was a cheerful and outgoing person with an infectious smile and bubbly nature. She loved talking to people and was always eager to engage in conversations, which made her a natural attention seeker. She thrived in social situations and was known for her ability to light up a room with her presence. Growing up on a dairy farm, Lacey developed a strong connection with nature. She spent much of her childhood exploring the outdoors and enjoying the beauty that surrounded her. One of her favorite activities was gardening with her mother, which became a source of joy and fulfillment for both of them. Lassie's love for gardening would later influence her interests and career choices as an adult. Lassie was a cheerleader at Thomas Downey High School, which was a great fit for her outgoing and bubbly personality. She made a strong impression on her school and became the ideal cheerleader. After graduating, Lassie attended California Polytechnic University, where she studied ornamental horticulture due to her interest in plants and wildlife. Lassie frequently visited a friend who worked at a restaurant in Morro Bay. It was there that she met Scott Peterson, a co-worker of her friend. Lassie was immediately attracted to Scott and was smitten. She took the initiative and gave Scott her phone number. Scott quickly reached out and they surprisingly hit it off during their first conversation. Scott then asked Lassie on their first date, a deep-sea fishing trip. However, things didn't go as planned for Lassie, who ended up getting seasick. After a rocky start, Lassie and Scott's relationship blossomed, and they eventually decided to live together. Before meeting Lassie, Scott had aspirations to become a professional golfer, but as their relationship progressed, his focus shifted, and he chose to pursue a career in business instead. Lassie graduated from Cal Poly in 1997, and Scott followed suit the next year. This milestone marked the beginning of a new era in their lives, full of promise and potential. On August 9, 1997, the couple tied the knot in Isla Valley, San Luis Obispo County. The beautiful resort setting provided a stunning backdrop for their special day. Surrounded by friends and family, they celebrated their love and solidified their commitment to each other. After getting married, Lassie and Scott embarked on a new business venture, opening a sports bar called The Shack in San Luis Obispo, California. The Shack, owned by Lassie and Scott, started off slowly but eventually attracted a steady stream of customers, with weekends being particularly busy. After several successful years, the couple decided to sell the bar in 2000, seeking new opportunities despite its stable income. Following the sale, they moved to Lassie's hometown of Modesto, California, and purchased a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom home in an upscale neighborhood in October 2000. Lassie took on a part-time job as a substitute teacher, while Scott worked for a European fertilizer company. Lassie devoted herself to supporting Scott, taking care of the home, cooking, and cleaning. She made sure their home was always warm and inviting. In 2002, the couple received exciting news. Lassie was pregnant, and they were expecting a baby. Lassie and Scott were expecting a baby boy, with a due date set for February 10, 2003. They had already chosen the name Connor for their unborn child. On December 24, 2002, Scott stated that he left their house at 9:30 a.m. to go fishing at the Berkeley Marina. Scott said he left Lassie at home on Christmas Eve morning, with a busy day ahead of her. She was planning to watch a Martha Stewart show, clean the floor, bake Christmas cookies, and walk their dog, Mackenzie, at the park. However, one of their neighbors found Mackenzie wandering outside their home around 10:30 a.m. and returned the dog to their backyard. When Scott came home from fishing that afternoon, he said the house was empty, with Mackenzie in the yard, but no sign of Lassie. Her car was still parked in the driveway. Scott claimed he showered and washed his dirty fishing clothes as soon as he got home. After his shower, Scott realized Lassie was missing and became concerned. He called her mother and stepfather, Sharon and Ron, but they hadn't heard from her all day and were worried about her safety. As the day went on and Lassie remained missing, Scott and Sharon decided to report her disappearance to the police around 6 p.m. They stressed to the police how urgent it was to find Lassie, who was 7 months pregnant with their baby, Connor. The police then questioned Scott out about his whereabouts and activities on the day Lassie vanished. Scott told police he went fishing at the Berkeley Marina, about 90 miles from his home in Modesto, where he lived with his pregnant wife Lassie. However, from the start, police suspected foul play in Lassie's disappearance. Initially, police didn't treat Lassie's case as suspicious after Scott and his mother-in-law filed a missing person report. Lassie's family defended Scott, and the couple seemed perfect, making it hard to imagine Scott harming his wife. As the investigation continued, police grew suspicious of Scott. About a month after Lassie vanished, they made a stunning discovery. Scott had 2 secret affairs and a long-term relationship with Amber Fry, who contacted police on December 30, 2002, after learning Scott was a suspect in Lassie's disappearance. Amber said she met Scott on November 20, 2002, and thought he was single. 2 weeks before Lassie's disappearance, Scott told Amber that he was a widower and that the upcoming Christmas would be his first without his wife. This revelation raised suspicions among the police, who wondered if Scott had already planned to kill his pregnant wife. To gather evidence, the police asked Amber to make a recorded phone call to Scott, hoping to capture a potential confession. The police informed Lassie's family about Scott's infidelities, and it was when they showed Lassie's mother a photo of Scott and Amber together that she became convinced of his guilt. The search for Lassie was highly comprehensive due to the involvement of the police, her loved ones, and numerous volunteers. In the first 2 days alone, more than 900 people participated in the search efforts. During a press conference, a police officer working on Lassie's case raised concerns that she may not have left her house voluntarily on December 24, 2002. Lassie's disappearance sparked widespread media attention, with the tragic and intriguing tale of a beautiful young woman vanishing from her home on Christmas Eve, captivating the public's imagination. As the public sought answers and speculated about her disappearance, the spotlight on Lassie's case intensified. When Lassie Peterson vanished on December 24, 2002, a $25,000 reward was initially offered for information leading to her safe return. As the investigation yielded no leads, the reward was increased to $500,000 to boost awareness and gather more information. To keep Lassie's case in the public eye, posters were prominently displayed in Modesto, California, and a friend's husband created a website to spread the word. Months later, on April 13, 2003, a couple walking their dog in Richmond's Point Isabel Regional Shoreline Park stumbled upon a gruesome discovery in a marshy area. They found the decomposing body of a male infant. The next day, another person discovered the body of a pregnant woman on the east side of the bay shore, about a mile away from where the baby was found. On April 18, 2003, DNA tests confirmed that the bodies were indeed those of Lassie and her unborn son, Connor. Lassie and Connor were laid to rest at Burwood Cemetery. The autopsy revealed disturbing evidence. The baby had 1.5 loops of nylon tape around his neck and a significant cut on his body. Lassie's autopsy showed even more brutal injuries: 2 cracked ribs, her upper torso hollowed out with internal organs removed, and she was missing her head and limbs. The medical examiner concluded that the baby died in the womb and was expelled from Lassie's body after her death. Investigators from the FBI and Modesto Police Department searched the home of Scott and Lassie, looking for evidence of their involvement in her disappearance. The search turned up several crucial clues, including a hair found in Scott's pliers on his fishing boat. After analyzing the hair, the FBI matched it to Lassie's DNA. In addition to the home search, the FBI also thoroughly examined Scott's truck and warehouse, seeking any evidence linking him to Lassie's disappearance. The FBI searched Scott's boat and found a homemade anchor that he claimed was made from a 90-pound bag of concrete, which he had used to repair his driveway. However, the prosecution believed that Scott had created multiple anchors and used 4 of them to weigh down Lassie's body in San Francisco Bay. The bodies found in the bay were later identified as Lassie and Connor, leading to Scott's arrest near a golf course. Notably, Scott's appearance had changed significantly. His dark brown hair was now blonde. When arrested, Scott's vehicle was found to be packed with various items, including a large sum of cash, survival gear, and camping equipment. The police also discovered 4 cell phones and 2 driver's licenses, one belonging to Scott and the other linked to his brother. This evidence suggested to the police that Scott was attempting to flee the state. Scott's father offered an alternative explanation for the driver's license found in Scott's possession. According to his father, Scott had borrowed his brother's license to get a discount at a golf course. As for why Scott's car was packed, his father claimed it was because Scott was living out of his car to avoid the media, who were camping outside his house at the time. Scott's trial began in June 2004, a year after his arrest. During the opening arguments, the prosecution presented its case to the jury, arguing that Scott had killed Lassie because of his affair with Amber Fry. The prosecution highlighted Scott's suspicious behavior in the days leading up to and following Lassie's disappearance, pointing out inconsistencies in his statements to the police. Scott initially told the police he was fishing on the day Lassie went missing, but later told others he was golfing. The prosecution also noted that Scott asked the police if they had used cadaver dogs to search a park where Lassie was supposed to walk their dog, implying that Scott was aware of the potential crime scene and trying to cover his tracks. Scott's defense team presented a strong argument in court, highlighting that Scott's history of infidelity did not necessarily prove he was guilty of murdering his wife. They reasoned that Scott would not give up his life for someone he had only dated 4 times. The defense suggested that Lassie's hair might have been found in Scott's boat because she had visited the marina with him before. During the trial, 2 of Lassie's relatives testified that Scott showed no emotional response when his pregnant wife went missing. New evidence emerged when a realtor testified that Scott tried to sell their home in January, a month after Lassie's disappearance. Additionally, a salesman revealed that Scott traded in Lassie's car after she vanished. The prosecution viewed these events as incriminating evidence against Scott. Amber Fry, Scott's mistress, took the stand and shared details of their affair. The jury listened to secret recordings of Amber's phone calls with Scott, including one where he lied about being in Paris when he was actually attending a vigil for his missing wife. During the trial, a hydrologist and tide expert testified that it was possible for Lassie's body to have been dumped in the area where Scott claimed to be fishing on the day Lassie went missing. However, the defense team argued that there was a lack of credible evidence directly linking Scott to the crime. Their theory was that someone had kidnapped Lassie on Christmas Eve 2002, holding her captive until she gave birth to Connor and then disposing of both bodies in the San Francisco Bay. The defense attorney emphasized that there was no concrete evidence to connect Scott directly to the crime and that other suspects could have been responsible. A significant issue arose during the trial when a juror was removed and replaced with an alternate due to misconduct. The dismissed juror had conducted unauthorized research on the case, violating legal procedures. Additionally, the foreman of the jury asked to be removed, and it was determined that his removal was necessary to ensure a fair and just trial. On November 12, 2004, a California jury found Scott guilty of 2 murder counts: first-degree murder for killing his wife Lassie and second-degree murder for killing their unborn son Connor. The charge of first-degree murder for Lassie's killing carried special circumstances because of the involvement of the fetus, making Scott eligible for the death penalty. After his conviction, the trial entered the penalty phase to determine his punishment. In this phase, the jury considered various factors, including Scott's prior criminal history, circumstances that aggravated the crime, and circumstances that mitigated it. The jury unanimously agreed that Scott should receive the death penalty. After reviewing the evidence, the judge upheld the jury's verdict. He concluded that Lassie's murder was cruel, uncaring, heartless, and callous, which led to Scott being sentenced to death. As is automatic in such cases, the sentence was appealed and the California Supreme Court heard the case in June 2020. During the appeal, Scott's lawyers presented several arguments. They claimed that some potential jurors were unfairly dismissed, that 2 jurors were improperly allowed onto Scott's boat, and that the trial should have been moved to a different county due to biased questionnaire results, which showed that almost half of the potential jurors thought Scott was guilty before the trial even started. The state counted that there was no evidence to support the claim that any juror was unfairly dismissed, and that none of the 12 jurors who ultimately decided Scott's fate were biased. In August 2020, the United States Supreme Court upheld Scott's conviction, but overturned his death sentence. In 2004, a judge resentenced Scott to life in prison without parole, which led to his transfer from San Quentin State Prison to Mule Creek State Prison in Ione, California. Around the same time, on April 1, 2004, President George W. Bush signed the Unborn Victims of Violence Act, UVVA, into law. Lassie's mother and stepfather attended the signing ceremony. Lassie and Connor's law was designed to provide legal protection for unborn children in cases where their mothers were victims of violence. The legislation recognizes the unborn child as a separate legal entity from their mother, making it a crime to harm or kill the unborn child during an attack on a pregnant woman. The law acknowledges that an unborn child is a victim of violence and deserves the same rights and protections as any other human being. On July 10, 1991, the staff of the Whitehall Motel in El Dorado, Arkansas heard a gunshot from room 121. Moments later, a man was seen fleeing the scene with a gun in his hand. While people at the hotel called 911, the man ran to the parking lot and sped away in a car. When police entered the room, they discovered a deceased woman with a gunshot wound to the head. She was between 5 feet 10 inches and 5 feet 11 inches and weighed 162 pounds. The victim was a Caucasian woman between the ages of 18 and 30. She had blue eyes and about 9-inch long brown hair, which had been dyed blonde previously. She wore a white t-shirt, acid-wash jeans with a black belt, white tennis shoes with white ankle socks, and a gold-colored chain bracelet on her right arm. As a distinctive identification, she had a birthmark under her left breast. She had freckles, 2 piercings in her left ear, and 3 piercings in her right ear. Bruises were found on her right eye and left wrist, suggesting that she most likely was battered and abused before her death. An identification card was discovered along with the body with the victim's photo and the name Cheryl and Wick. Yet after authorities tracked down the real Cheryl Anwick, who was very much alive, authorities realized the victim was not Cheryl, nor was she Mercedes, Cheryl Kaufman, Kelly Lee Carr, Shannon, or Sharon Wiley, all aliases she used while she was alive. Although police found many of her friends, nobody knew her real identity. Ultimately, she was named the El Dorado Jane Doe. Soon, police apprehended the killer, James McAlpin, the victim's ex-boyfriend and occasional pimp, and charged him with first-degree murder and second-degree battery. Jane Doe met McAlpin shortly after she had moved to Dallas. However, the relationship was rocky from the start, and abuse was a constant factor. Throughout her relationship, she was in and out of the emergency room to treat the injuries inflicted by her boyfriend. The situation deteriorated so quickly that even the local police, along with her friends, tried to get her out of the relationship. That effort was successful when in June 1991, Jane Doe left McAlpin despite his repeated threats to kill her. Jane Doe then went to live at a friend's apartment. McAlpin's threats continued after he learned that she was seeing someone else. Despite the threats, Jane Doe finally met with McAlpin after he called, promising her money. They set up a meeting at the Whitehall Motel. Her friends warned her not to go, but she went anyway. She said she needed the money to send presents to her children. It was revealed that the argument started right after Jane Doe entered the motel room, where McAlpin was already there waiting for her. She ran out of the door at some point, but he chased her to the parking lot and dragged her back to the room. Moments after a gunshot was heard, McAlpin then fled the scene. McAlpin's version of events was a bit different, though. He claimed that she snatched the gun from him and shot herself. He then fled, fearing that he would be blamed for obvious reasons. The jury did not buy his story. McAlpin ended up accepting a plea deal for second-degree murder and was sentenced to 15 years for the crime. In all of this chaos, one thing remained unchanged: the confusion regarding Jane Doe's identity. Who was she? After McAlpin's arrest, police hoped to unravel the victim's identity, but he declined to reveal anything without money in exchange for information. However, detectives believe that McAlpin had no idea about her true identity, since he knew her as Mercedes. A Bible was also found in Doe's possession that contained several names of the Stroud family. When police reached the Stroud family, they were convinced that Jane Doe was not related to this family since they were African American and she was white. However, she had lived with them for some time in mid to late 1990 under the name Cheryl and Wick, a runaway from Louisiana who had just moved there from Minneapolis, Minnesota. A bit more information came to light after the police dug deeper. While staying in Dallas, Jane Doe worked at a local KFC full-time, but occasionally engaged in prostitution to pay her bills. Between 1990 and 1991, she was arrested 4 times for different charges, including prostitution, public lewdness, and writing bad checks, each under the name Cheryl and Wick. Although police had reconstructed some of Jane Doe's movements before her death, unmasking her identity seemed an impossible task, considering she told numerous different stories to different people. To some people, she said that she used to be a stripper, was from out of town, and had 2 kids raised by her mother, with whom she did not get along. To others, she had said she was in the witness protection program and that her father was in the mafia. Some had heard that she was wanted for bank robberies on the East Coast. There were even rumors of her being on the run for the murder of a truck driver. But none of these could be proven as a fact, and she remained the El Dorado Jane Doe for decades. This case is very bizarre considering, unlike most other Jane Doe cases, authorities had real-life photos of the victim, her killer behind bars, and people knew her before her death. The only puzzle piece missing was her true identity. In 2019, Yolanda McCleary, a genealogy researcher and crime scene investigator, approached local law enforcement with her team to help identify Jane Doe. After several search efforts and DNA profile work, Yolanda and her team were finally able to track down a distant cousin using GED match. From there, they were able to reconstruct a family tree. After more than 30 years in 2022, El Dorado Jane Doe's real identity was finally made known. The woman was identified as Kelly, whose last name is kept hidden to respect her family's privacy. In 1968, Kelly was born in Virginia to a woman named Brenda. She grew up knowing her stepfather as a father figure because her biological father had no idea she even existed. Kelly had one younger sister. Soon, Brenda divorced her then husband and she remarried 2 more times after that. After 3 failed marriages, Brenda moved to Virginia Beach and Kelly and her sister went to live with her aunt. After about a year, Kelly came back to stay with her mother. At this time, she dropped out of school in 10th grade and began working at a beach jewelry kiosk. By this time, Brenda had developed a drug addiction and a penchant for stealing. In 1986, at the age of 18, she moved to Little Rock. She would spend roughly 3 years in the city, leaving in 1989. Kelly grew closer with her younger sister after moving to Florida in 1989, even briefly moving her sister in with her during her stint in Florida. From there, the 2 sisters went their separate ways when Kelly moved to Virginia in 1990, followed by Texas in 1991. Later that same year, Kelly eventually moved to El Dorado. This is where she spent the rest of her life until her ex-boyfriend murdered her on July 10, 1991. Throughout these relocations, Kelly used several fake names to conceal her identity. Although Brenda did not seem to care about her daughter, the sister tried to find Kelly and always wondered where she was, although nobody formally reported her missing. Despite all the confusion surrounding Kelly's true identity, genetic scientists have once again managed to unravel the mystery. On July 31, 1960, a schoolteacher from Las Vegas named Russell Allen was looking for rocks to decorate his garden in a desert area near Congress, Arizona, just off of Old Alamo Road, 1.5 miles from Highway 93. After just a few moments, he stumbled upon something so horrific that would haunt him for decades. In the creek bed of Sandwash, a little girl's badly decomposing, partially buried body was concealed. He wasted no time in notifying the authorities. As local police reached the scene, they found the body wearing a blue blouse and reddish shorts. The adult-sized rubber thong sandals that she was wearing were cut down to fit her feet, and leather straps fastened the sandals. Her perfect set of baby teeth remained intact. Her toenails and fingernails were painted bright red. There were no signs of fractured or broken bones, which ruled out the history of abuse, suggesting that this was a random attack. The remains were, however, charred. Detectives believe that the perpetrator tried to dispose of her body by burning it, but could not entirely accomplish the task. He then changed his plan and buried the body in the desert, but did not do a very good job of that either. An autopsy concluded that the body belonged to a child. The investigators estimated that the little girl was in the age range of 2 to 7 years with an approximate height of 3 feet, 5 inches. She weighed between 50 and 60 pounds. She was Caucasian and had brown hair, but it could have been previously tinted or dyed auburn. However, no one could tell if she had any birthmarks or distinctive spots on her body, due to extreme decomposition and charring. Her cause of death could not be determined, but officials considered this case a homicide based on the circumstances. It was a tragic case all around. Not only did the killer get away, even after such a monstrous act, but nobody even knew who this poor child was. However, people in the nearby Prescott community did their best to honor her. Residents in the nearby central North Arizona community of Prescott raised money for a funeral and even arranged florists. A local mortuary donated its services for the little girl they lovingly dubbed Little Miss Nobody, since nobody came forward to identify her. There was a lot of coverage from the media on this case in the first month of the gruesome discovery, but there were no leads to follow. Although the local sheriff's department continued their search for months, even interrogating every child sex offender in that area, yet nothing ever came of it. The case went cold as every clue turned out to be a dead end. Throughout the years, many desperate families came to the sheriff's department asking if she was their missing child, but none were a match. Then, in 2021, the Yavapai County Sheriff's Office partnered with heartwarming, a Texas-based laboratory, to see if advanced DNA testing could help solve the mystery of Little Miss Nobody. Although the preserved evidence was not strong enough for reconstruction and building a DNA profile with improved technology, the lab built a DNA profile that had not been possible in the past. Indeed, the lab returned the identity to authorities in February 2022, and the mystery surrounding a little girl's identity was finally solved after 6 decades. Little Miss Nobody was 4-year-old Sharon Lee Gallegos. She was born on September 6, 1955, with her mother, grandmother, and 6 other relatives. Sharon and her 2 older siblings lived in Alamogordo. She had no contact with her soldier father since he left the family when Sharon was a baby. The Gallegos were not wealthy, but the love was unconditional in this tight-knit family. Her loved ones described Sharon as a happy-go-lucky child who loved running errands with her mother and enjoyed playing outside with the neighborhood kids along with her siblings. At approximately 3 p.m. on July 21, 1960, Sharon was kidnapped in an alley near her Virginia Avenue home while playing with her 2 cousins. The eyewitnesses said a couple offered to buy Sharon some candy and clothes in exchange for getting in the car with them. Sharon refused, but was dragged to the vehicle anyway. The car was described as a dark green 1951 or 1952 model Dodge or Plymouth sedan. The man was described as a fair, thin Caucasian with a long nose and sandy-colored straight hair, whereas the witnesses described the woman as a short, stout individual in her 30s. After loading Sharon into the car, the vehicle sped away. Once her cousins told Sharon's mom about what happened, she immediately called the police. Roadblocks were set up in nearby places but failed to apprehend the abductor. Investigators were concerned that Sharon was probably stalked for days or weeks before the abduction, but could not find out the perpetrators. Shockingly, in 1960, Sharon was not considered to be Little Miss Nobody because the remains looked much older than Sharon. This case was always open until the identification of Little Miss Nobody. Sadly, Sharon's parents passed away before the mystery was solved. Regardless, the surviving family members of Sharon were relieved to know that she had been found. Unfortunately, no new information on her killer has surfaced. On the morning of July 15, 1982, a gravedigger was working when he discovered the badly decomposing body of a woman in the rear of Cedar Ridge Cemetery in Blairstown, New Jersey. The body was lying on its back, just over a steep bank leading to a creek below. The victim's face had been beaten beyond recognition with a yet-to-be-determined object. Due to the significant decomposition of her body, her eye color could not be discerned. The body was clad in a red short-sleeved shirt while a peasant-style skirt lay on top of the victim's legs, but no underwear was found. The level of decay made it difficult to find conclusive evidence of a sexual assault. A golden cross necklace was tangled in the victim's hair. 2 earrings adorned her left ear. Red nail polish was found on the right hand, but not the left. There were no traces of any surgical scars, distinct birthmarks, or tattoos. Her front 2 teeth were darker than the rest. No signs of assault were found. Forensic anthropologists determined that the victim was 14 to 18 years of age and had never been pregnant or given birth. Toxicology did not reveal any traces of drugs, but the report was not entirely conclusive, because so much time had elapsed between her death and the discovery of the body. The autopsy revealed that the body was discovered after days or possibly even weeks of exposure to the natural elements. The hot and humid weather conditions made it more difficult for the forensic department to determine the specifics surrounding the time of death. Trauma on the arms of the victim revealed that she had attempted to fight back against the attacker. On January 22, 1983, Jane Doe was given a proper burial. Sadly, though, no family members were present at her funeral as her identity remained a mystery. Moved by the tragic story of this poor young woman, the townspeople donated the cost of the victim's coffin, headstone, and burial plot. Princess Doe Missing from Home. Dead among strangers, remembered by all, were the heartbreaking markings on the tombstone. There was a possible sighting of Princess Doe before her murder. In an attempt to find information about this unidentified victim, detailed pictures of her clothing were shared with the public. After seeing images of the clothing in a newspaper, a woman reported to officials that she remembered seeing a girl wearing the same clothing purchasing cigarettes on July 13, 1982, just 2 days before her body was found. However, like several others, this lead led nowhere. On June 30, 1983, Princess Doe became the first person to be entered into the FBI's National Computerized Unidentified Deceased Files. Through the years, the focus was shifted to many suspects, ranging from local residents to serial killers. However, all of them were eventually cleared, and frustratingly, police were back at square one. For many years, Princess Doe was wrongly thought to be Diane Janice Dye, a missing teenager from San Jose, California, who vanished on July 30, 1979. This theory held court with several law enforcement officials in the state of New Jersey, who went so far as to declare Diane Dye as Princess Doe in a press conference. However, Lieutenant Eric Krantz, Princess Doe case's original lead investigator, maintained that Diane Dye was not a plausible candidate for Princess Doe's identity. Krantz's insights were backed up by Diane's family and the investigators in California, who were disgusted by the conduct of the New Jersey law enforcement. In 2003, Princess Doe's DNA was compared with a DNA sample from Diane's mother, Patricia, and it was conclusively determined that Diana Dye was not Princess Doe. In 2005, a convicted serial killer named Arthur Kinlaw wrote a letter to the police expressing his desire to confess to another murder. According to the New York Times, Kinlaw had previously been charged with killing and dumping a girl's body in the East River. In 2005, Kinlaw, whom the police believed had run a prostitution ring in the past, wanted to tell the investigators about a young woman he had murdered in New Jersey. However, Kinlaw's claims couldn't be corroborated by the police due to a lack of substantial evidence at that time. Though investigators had collected DNA evidence from Princess Doe's body, it was only in recent years that they were able to test her earthly remains. In 2007, the body was exhumed, and the University of North Texas Center for Human Identification analyzed the skeletal remains of Princess Doe. In 2012, a composite sketch was made to identify Princess Doe using DNA technologies, but it didn't lead to any new information. Then, in 2021, the Astrea Forensics Lab analyzed DNA from her teeth and eyelashes, and were successfully able to extract DNA from those samples, which were initially thought to be of no value. Indeed, Princess Doe's eyelashes and teeth were the keys to discovering her identity. After the first clue was grasped, other details started filling in. In 2022, investigators were able to finally identify Princess Doe as Dawn Olenek, a 17-year-old Long Island resident. Princess Doe's 40th anniversary was the day marked for the announcement of her identification. Dawn Olenek was born in a Christian home on August 5, 1964 in West Babylon, New York. In 1982, 17-year-old Dawn was a high school junior living with her mother and sister in Bohemia, New York. She left home on June 24, 1982 at her mother's request. The mother wanted Olenek out of the house. The reason why has never been clarified, and she was never seen alive again. Detectives believe that after leaving her home, somewhere, somehow, Dawn had crossed paths with Arthur Kinlaw. Kinlaw then tried to force her into sex work for a prostitution ring that he and his wife Donna ran in Suffolk County, New York throughout the 1980s. When she refused, he killed her in an attempt to get rid of a witness. Following the identification of Princess Doe as Dawn Olenek, Arthur Kinlaw was reconsidered as a suspect and later charged with Olenek's murder. If convicted, he will be facing another life sentence, along with the 2 he is already serving. For 40 years, law enforcement has not given up on Princess Doe. Warren County Prosecutor James Pfeiffer stated in a news conference, added that science and technology played crucial parts in solving Olenek's murder. Olenek's surviving relatives sat with her photo pinned to their lapels at the press conference. For over 40 years, Dawn had been resting in a grave in the town of Blairstone, New Jersey. Now her family is deciding whether or not she should stay in New Jersey. or come home to New York. Whatever their decision might be, investigators are relieved to finally have identified her and given Dawn Olenek her identity back. In the era of DNA advancements, victims deserve much more than a gravestone with no name on it. Hopefully in the future, no family will have to live their lives wondering about their lost loved ones. On June 3, 1993, a trucker stopped to relieve himself on the side of the westbound State Route 152, also known as the Pacheco Pass Highway near Gilroy, California, when something grabbed his attention. It looked like the partially skeletal remains of a human body. After authorities reached the scene, they found a decomposing female body wearing blue jeans and a blue t-shirt with a blue jacket. She had white underwear and white Nike socks with blue stripes. Her brown tennis shoes were also recovered from the scene. After the body was taken to the coroner's office for an autopsy, many details about the victim's description and her murder were revealed. The forensic scientist concluded that the body belonged to a white woman, but she also had Hispanic characteristics. She was in her late 30s or early 40s at the time of her death. Most likely at the end of May 1993. She featured medium-length brown hair with brown eyes. At about 5 feet, 2 inches tall, she weighed around 130 pounds. The 5-inch scar was found on her abdomen, possibly resulting from gallbladder surgery. She also had track marks across her arm indicating drug abuse. The manner of death was ruled a homicide by strangulation, and the body seemed to have been dumped after the murder. Even with all of these details, detectives faced difficulty finding out who this woman was. She did not match any missing persons in the area. No one came forward to claim her, nor could detectives connect any of the evidence to any person. Eventually, they started referring to her as the Blue Pacheco Jane Doe. The case went cold soon after the murder. Then, in 2006, Keith Hunter Jesperson, otherwise known as the infamous Happy Face Killer, submitted a letter to the Santa Clara County District Attorney's Office admitting to sexually assaulting and killing an unknown female along the dirt turnout on Highway 152. Between 1990 and 1995, Jesperson strangled 8 women, including prostitutes and transients in several U.S. states such as California, Florida, Nebraska, Oregon, Washington, and Wyoming. He is currently incarcerated at the Oregon State Penitentiary. He was known as the Happy Face Killer. Due to the happy face drawing, he always included in his letters taunting the police. Jesperson added significant details of the murder in his letter to authorities. He claimed he met her at a truck stop on Interstate 5 in Corning, California, and offered her a ride after buying her lunch. During the ride, the woman talked about having relatives in the Sacramento, California area. Jesperson believed she might have been a prostitute. In Williams, California, they engaged in sexual activities, and then he strangled her before driving on toward Gilroy, California. Several hours later, he stopped at the Pacheco Pass on Highway 152 and tossed her body off the turnout. Although he mentioned her name being Cindy or Carla, he too had no idea about her true identity. A year after this confession, he pled guilty to her murder and received a life sentence. It was the rarest of situations where authorities had a convict behind bars without identification of the victim. Blue Pacheco Jane Doe remained one of 3 unidentified victims of the Happy Face serial killer for decades. In 2019, detectives from the Santa Clara County Sheriff's Office began utilizing the new DNA technology advancements and an attempt to identify Blue Pacheco Jane Doe while partnering with the nonprofit DNA Doe Project. Finally, in April 2022, she was discovered to be Patricia Skipple from Colton, Oregon. Patricia Skipple was born May 29, 1948, and grew up in Colton, Oregon. Patsy, as she preferred to be called, was a mother of 2 and a resident of Oregon. She was described as a gentle woman who loved her family more than anything. In 1992, she left her home and also the city in the middle of the night after an argument with her husband. She never returned. For years, Patsy's family wondered where she was and if she'd ever come home. It was only after detectives paid a visit to Patsy's family saying that she was identified that they came to know her fate. We can only hope that they heal knowing that justice was served for Patsy. In the late morning hours of June 16, 1974, a man was searching for driftwood with his 2 teenage sons in a condensed wooded area of Singer Island in North Palm Beach, Florida. The trio was combing through the area along the eastern edge of the Intric Coastal Waterway, just 2 miles south of Lost Tree Village, when they came across what looked like skeletal remains. Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office investigators soon reached the area to discover a gruesome scene. The remains appeared to be tied to a tree. Amongst the bones, they found mostly deteriorated clothing, including a black knit pullover sweater that was trimmed at the bottom, a gray waistband and long gray sleeves that were capped at the shoulders, and size 5 yellow panties with yellow stripes. Denim material was also discovered at the scene, which was believed to have originated from a pair of denim high-crop shorts. The partial remains were brought in for examination. The remains were in such bad condition that the medical examiner could not determine the cause of death in the autopsy. Although holes in the sweater indicated gunshot wounds, however, no bullet casing were found at the scene. There were definite signs that animal activity had scattered the remains. The medical examiner concluded that the remains belonged to a white female between the ages of 14 and 25. She weighed approximately 83 to 103 pounds and stood anywhere from 4 feet 11 inches to 5 feet 2 inches. She most likely had blonde hair with a red tint to it. Due to the level of decomposition at the time of her discovery, her eye color could not be determined. Regardless of that, an abstract profile of the victim was created. When media reports first came out, the Singer Island Jane Doe was believed to be Bonnie Robinson, a young girl who had gone missing from Detroit, Michigan. Yet upon further investigation, this theory was ruled out. Over the years, many attempts were made to identify the young girl. Then, in April of 2014, her body was exhumed to collect more physical evidence. In 2015, a DNA profile was developed, but there was no match in Cody's, suggesting that the girl likely had no criminal history. After developing a DNA profile, several other missing women were able to be ruled out through DNA comparison. In 2019, the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office prepared a new facial reconstruction of the girl, but no one came forward with any leads. Finally, in December 2021, the DNA was sent to a genealogy lab to comb through genetic databases and try to develop a family tree based on the recovered DNA. In March 2022, the ancestry was successfully traced, leading to the identification of distant relatives of Singer Island Jane Doe. After relentless efforts, the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office was able to contact potential family members. Additional DNA testing of surviving family members confirmed Jane Doe's identity as 15-year-old Suzanne Poole. Susan Poole was born February 12, 1957. She lived in a trailer park with her family in Fort Lauderdale. The 15-year-old went missing from Broward County, Florida in December of 1972. Susan was a troubled teen. On many previous occasions, she ran away from home. She often hitched rides with strangers, which was common in those days. So her family was not initially alarmed when she went missing in 1972, believing she had left voluntarily and would soon return home as she normally did. Susan was never heard from or seen again. As decades passed, her family members always wondered whether or not she had left of her own volition. The only possessions Susan left behind were some clothing and her pocketbook, which was later discovered at her friend's home. It would take over 5 decades to put all the clues together to what happened to Susan Poole. The saddest part of this is despite getting her identity back 50 years after her tragic demise, her parents did not live long enough to see this day. There are still no leads as to who her killer was. Case of Sherry Popini. Keith and Sherry Popini first met in middle school, when Keith was in 7th grade and Sherry was in 8th. They shared their first kiss with each other. Their friendship flourished quickly and they remained close throughout their teenage years. However, as they grew older, they drifted apart and went their separate ways. Years later, Sherry married another man in 2006, but the marriage was short-lived, lasting only 2 years. After her divorce, Sherry found herself single again. Then, by chance, she ran into Keith, and the spark between them was immediately rekindled. The time they had spent apart had given them both personal growth and maturity, and they realized how much they had missed each other. Keith and Sherry decided to give their love a second chance, and they started dating. As they spent more time together, their connection grew stronger every day. Within a year of reuniting, they knew they were meant to be together. They got married in 2009 and had 2 children, settling down in Reading, California. Sherry used to work in telecommunications, but after having children, she became a stay-at-home mom. Keith continued to work at Best Buy as a member of the Geek Squad. The Papini family seemed to have a perfect life from the outside. However, on November 2nd, 2016, Keith's world was turned upside down when he came home to find his wife, Sherry, missing. It was unusual for her not to be there, as she was always home when he returned from work. At first, Keith thought she might have gone for a walk, but as time passed and she didn't come back, he grew increasingly worried. Keith called the daycare center their children attended to see if Sherry had picked them up, but the school secretary told him she hadn't. This heightened Keith's concern, and he decided to use the Find My iPhone app on his phone to track her location. The app showed that her phone was at the end of their driveway. Alarmed, Keith rushed outside to search the area and found Sherry's phone lying on the ground, with her headphones nearby. When Keith found Sherry's phone and headphones at the end of the driveway, he made a disturbing discovery. There was strands of hair entangled in the headphones. He immediately contacted the authorities at the Shasta County Sheriff's Office, who took Sherry's disappearance seriously and brought in the FBI right from the start. Keith was desperate to find Sherry and get her back safely. To do this, he knew it was crucial to get her name and face out to the public. So he spoke to the media, hoping to generate support and assistance in finding her. The media played a huge role in spreading the story of Sherry's disappearance, and her beauty, blonde hair and blue eyes made her case especially captivating to the public. As a result, news channels eagerly covered every detail of the story. After Sherry went missing and it became public, the police received many tips, but none of them led to finding her. As they continued to investigate, they looked at Sherry's phone for clues. They found a heated text conversation between Sherry and her husband Keith from a few months earlier, which made the police suspicious of Keith's possible involvement. Despite this, Keith was cooperative and offered to take a lie detector test to clear his name. He passed the test. In addition to the argument with Keith, the police found texts on Sherry's phone from men using fake female names. It seemed like Sherry was planning to leave Keith. On November 10th, 2016, the police tracked down one of these men and questioned him about Sherry's disappearance. The man claimed to have met Sherry 5 years prior at a restaurant during a work conference she was attending. Although he said he didn't know her current whereabouts, he shared some information about her relationship with her husband, Keith. According to the man, Sherry did not respect Keith and was even fearful of him. He alleged that Keith was violent and abusive, often locking Sherry up in their home. After a tip from a man who knew Sherry, claiming that her husband Keith was abusive, the police launched an investigation. However, after speaking with friends and neighbors, they found no evidence to support the claims of Keith's violence. Several days into Sherry's disappearance, on November 24, 2016, the police received a call at 4:32 a.m. on Thanksgiving morning. The caller reported a woman in distress on the side of I-5. The police rushed to the scene and found a woman bound with chains and zip ties. It took a moment for the officers to realize Sherry Papini, who had been missing for days. Relieved to find her alive, they carefully freed her from the restraints and took her to the hospital for medical attention. When Sherry arrived at the hospital, it was clear that she had been through a traumatic experience. Her body was covered in bruises, her hair was noticeably shorter, and she had a burn mark on her arm as well as a bad rash. She had also lost a significant amount of weight, weighing in only 87 pounds. While Sherry was recovering at Woodland Memorial Hospital, the police tried to interview her, but she was too emotional to provide any information. The only condition under which she would cooperate was if her husband Keith was present in the room. With Keith by her side, Sherry recounted the terrifying incident. She said she was out jogging when a dark-colored SUV driven by 2 women approached her. She got out of the vehicle, pointed a gun at her, while Sherry Papini stayed in the car. Sherry was forced into the back of the SUV against her will. Before getting into the vehicle, Sherry had the presence of mind to leave behind her phone and headphones on the driveway, along with some strands of her hair. She did this intentionally, hoping that Keith would find them and realize something was wrong. Sherry shared the details of her abduction with the police and her husband Keith. During the journey, she kept dozing off in the back of the SUV, making it difficult for her to keep track of time. The two women had wrapped something around her face, preventing her from seeing her surroundings. They told her that she was being kidnapped because a man wanted to buy her and she was being taken to meet him. However, they refused to reveal the man's identity or location. Sherry was terrified and worried about her fate, unsure of where she was being taken or what would happen to her during her captivity. She also claimed to have been physically abused by one of the women who frequently hit her, leaving her with multiple injuries. Sherry claimed that her captors branded her right shoulder with the word Exodus to attract a buyer, who was allegedly a police officer. She also said that her captors constantly played mariachi music, which she found disorienting and unsettling. This music added to the oppressive atmosphere of her captivity, making her feel more isolated. Sherry was held in a single room with a boarded-up window. She was chained in a closet that served as a bathroom with a bucket for sanitation purposes. About 3 weeks into her captivity, Sherry heard a gunshot. After that, she had been with her disappeared, leaving Sherry to wonder if she had been killed. Sherry Papini, who had been quiet until now, took control of the situation. She instructed Sherry to get into a car, and they drove along I-5. Without warning, the car stopped, leaving Sherry startled and disoriented. She looked around, trying to understand what was happening. The younger woman then told Sherry to get out of the car. Confused and unsure, Sherry cautiously did as she was told. As Sherry exited the car, she felt a mix of fear and excitement. Was this her chance to escape, or was she being led into an even more dangerous situation? She was left with more questions than answers, feeling uncertain and scared. After being found safe on the side of I-5, the Shasta County Sheriff's Office held a press conference to announce Sherry's return. During the conference, the police reported that Sherry had been abducted by 2 Hispanic women, which sparked widespread concern among the public. However, this news brought unintended consequences. Following the press conference, a wave of racism erupted, targeting individuals of Spanish descent. The reporting of Sherry's abduction had fueled public fear and anxiety, leading some to unfairly blame individuals associated with the Hispanic community. After being abducted, Sherry returned home and began attending therapy sessions to cope with her trauma. As a California resident, she was eligible for the Victims' Compensation Fund, which uses public funds to help pay for victims' therapy. In the aftermath, she became withdrawn, spending more time at home and avoiding social outings. 1 year into the investigation, police released a composite sketch of 2 Hispanic women believed to be involved in the crime. Despite this development, no new leads emerged. The police also revealed that they had found male DNA on Sherry's underwear, which did not match her husband Keith's DNA. 2 years passed with no matches on the male DNA, and the case remained unsolved. However, in 2020, a long-awaited breakthrough finally occurred. The police working on Sherry's case decided to try a new approach to find the owner of the unknown DNA. They used a technique called familial DNA, which compares the DNA profile to potential relatives of the donor. This method is commonly used in criminal investigations to analyze DNA evidence and identify possible family members of a suspect. By looking at specific genetic traits shared among family members, investigators can create a shorter list of potential suspects and explore possible family connections. In the Sherry Papini case, the police were surprised to discover that the DNA found in her underwear matched a close relative of James Reyes, her ex-boyfriend. This new information raised many questions and became a crucial moment in the investigation. The police suspected Sherry's ex-boyfriend, James Reyes, of being involved in her abduction. To investigate, they collected a soda bottle from his trash in June 2020 and sent it to a forensic lab for DNA testing. A month later, the lab results showed a match between James' DNA and the DNA found on Sherry's underwear the day she was discovered. With this new evidence, the police went to James' home in Costa Mesa, California, where he worked at a sports shop, to ask him about Sherry's case. James told the police that he had dated Sherry about 10 years prior, and the last time he saw her was a year after they broke up. He claimed to have only heard about her disappearance and safe return through rumors. During the police interview, James initially denied any involvement in Sherry's kidnapping. However, as the conversation progressed, he revealed that he was still close friends with Sherry despite their breakup 10 years prior. Although James admitted to playing a role in her disappearance, he claimed he didn't nab her. Instead, he insisted he was merely assisting a friend in need. James reported to the police that Sherry reached out to him for help, claiming she needed to escape her abusive husband, Keith. On November 2, 2016, James told police that a friend had lent him a car, which he used the next day to pick up Sherry. According to James, Sherry hid in the back seat of the car, lying down during the drive to Costa Mesa. During her stay at James' house, Sherry mostly stayed in her room, only coming out to help with chores like cleaning and cooking. She even boarded up the bedroom window, as she wanted to feel secure with the door closed. James noticed that Sherry was intentionally trying to lose weight by barely eating. Sherry asked James to help her harm herself, including hitting herself to create bruises. James was uncomfortable with this request, but he still agreed to help her, even going so far as to shoot a hockey puck off her knee at her request. Despite his reservations, James participated in these harmful activities with Sherry. James confessed to branding Sherry with the word Exodus on her right shoulder using a wood-burning tool they had bought from Hobby Lobby. Before Sherry left his house, she asked James to get chains and zip ties, which he used to bind her securely, before driving her to Reading, California. During the drive, Sherry told James to stop the car, which he did, and she escaped. When questioned by the police, James denied knowing anything about the two Hispanic women Sherry claimed had abducted her. However, when the police searched James' house, they were shocked to find that several rooms matched the descriptions Sherry had given of the place where she was held captive. Specifically, James' bedroom and closet exactly matched a drawing Sherry had made for the police, detailing the layout of the rooms she had been confined to. The police discovered a striking similarity between a table at James' house and the one Sherry described in her initial interviews. They decided to bring Sherry and Keith in for another interview at the police station. The police had accumulated substantial evidence that led them to believe Sherry had faked her own abduction. They intended to confront her with their findings during the interview. Before revealing the truth, they asked Sherry if she wanted Keith to leave the room. Sherry remained silent. The police then decided to leave the couple alone for a few minutes. During this time, Sherry approached Keith and confessed that she didn't want the police to find the Hispanic woman who had supposedly abducted her. She felt indebted to this woman for sparing her life. Sherry refused to press charges against the woman who attacked her. Keith listened to her reasons, but he was skeptical and worried. Sherry's explanation didn't make sense to him, and he was starting to get scared. He pointed out that even if Sherry didn't want to press charges, the attacker would still face consequences for her actions. The police re-entered the interview room with an update. They had found a familial DNA match for the male DNA on Sherry's clothing, and it led them to James Reyes, Sherry's ex-boyfriend. When Keith heard the name, he had a visceral reaction. He knew James as Sherry's ex. The police told Sherry and Keith that James Reyes, Sherry's ex-boyfriend, had passed a lie detector test. They suspected that Sherry had faked her own kidnapping and claimed to have evidence to support James' version of events. Police told Sherry that they believed her significant weight loss during her disappearance was intentional, as she had chosen to eat very little. They also suggested that the rash on her arm was caused by the cleaning products she had used at James' house. Furthermore, the police alleged that James had used a wooden tool bought from Hobby Lobby to brand Sherry. They also claimed that Sherry's broken nose was self-inflicted, caused by hitting herself with a hockey stick. Despite the mounting evidence against her, Sherry remained calm and pretended not to understand what the police were talking about. Sherry Papini claimed to have not seen her ex-boyfriend James in years, stating she last saw him at his brother's funeral in Southern California. However, the police knew she was lying because James had provided them with information about her disappearance that only someone close to her would know. On March 3, 2022, the FBI arrested Sherry on charges of lying to federal agents and faking her own abduction. 6 weeks later, she agreed to a plea deal, admitting to orchestrating her kidnapping. Sherry's lawyers requested a sentence of 1 month in prison, followed by 7 months of house arrest. However, the prosecution recommended an 18-month sentence. In September 2022, the judge sentenced Sherry to 18 months in prison and ordered her to pay a $300,000 fine. The judge doubted that Sherry would ever be able to pay the fine, saying it would take winning the lottery. During the sentencing, the judge called Sherry a manipulator and habitual liar, stating that he had no doubt she would have continued lying if she hadn't been caught. The judge told Sherry that she needed to be punished to stop others from committing similar crimes. Sherry had taken advantage of many resources, including money meant for victims, Social Security disability payments, and a GoFundMe account set up after her fake kidnapping. The judge wanted to deter others from committing similar crimes by punishing Sherry. She spoke at her sentencing hearing, expressing regret and apologizing to those who had suffered because of her actions. Sherry acknowledged her guilt, saying she was responsible for lying and bringing shame to herself and those around her. In August 2023, Sherry was released from prison and moved to a halfway house. Sherry and her husband Keith separated on the day of her arrest in March 2022. After Sherry pleaded guilty, Keith filed for divorce the next month and sought full custody of their children. This story takes us to the beautiful and the peaceful village called Rowshock. Rowshock is a village and civil parish in the Wyre Forest district of Worcestershire, England. This is where Brenda lived before she met and married David Venables. Apart from a light industrial estate, Rowshock has 58 residential properties and a population of only about 124 people. The church stands on top of a bank and has a panoramic view. A small, peaceful village. Nothing much ever happened here. Kempsey is a village and civil parish in the Malvern Hills district in the county of Worcestershire. Bounded by the River Severn to the west and with the A38 main road running through it, it is about 3 miles south of Worcester. The village has a long history and its name is derived from the Saxon Chemisai, or the island of Chemis. Chemis was a Saxon chief whose island lay between the marshes and the River Severn. One of the roads in Kempsey, Leafs Lane, is named after another Saxon chief, and this is where Brenda and David started their married life. Kempsey was a calm area, consisting mainly of agricultural lands. No one would ever believe that anything violent would take place here, which makes it all the more surprising as to what happened. Brenda Bolton was 23 when she met David, who would later become her husband at a young farmers' event in Worcestershire. Both came from rural communities and farming families, so they connected straight away. After that first meeting at Droitwich Winter Gardens, David made time to see her at home in the tiny village of Rowshock, while juggling working on his family's pig farm. He would stop in for breakfast at Brenda's house on his way home from trips, taking produce from the farm to the Birmingham wholesale market. They were married in June 1960, before a honeymoon in Jersey. The couple later moved together at Quaking House Farm in Kempsey with the financial help of David's father. There, David farmed pigs, and the pair enjoyed a magnificent view of the surrounding countryside. To outsiders, their life seemed simple yet idyllic. Everything seemed normal as time progressed, but eventually the fateful day arrived. On May 3, 1982, Brenda was nowhere to be found. David searched extensively throughout his home and the surrounding areas, but finally filed a missing person report the following day. The village of Kempsey was soon overrun as the search for Brenda got underway. West Mercia police used a helicopter to help aid with the search. Tracker dogs were used to check farm buildings and abandoned properties, but no trace of her was found. There was a lot of speculation and many things were put forward, but most of them turned out to be just rumors. A lot of people heard rumors that she might be under the M5 motorway, which was being built during her disappearance. The police search lasted 2 or 3 weeks, covering a 4 or 5 mile area around Kempsey, up to the M50 motorway, including David's own 9 acres of land. There was a great deal of police presence in the area, searching everywhere to see if there was anything that would lead to finding Brenda. They cut back all the growth in the ditches to see if there was anything in them, but no traces or evidence was found. After a while, with nothing being found, the case went cold due to no fresh leads for the police to follow. For almost 40 years, Brenda's family was left without a single answer about what happened to her. Vicki Jennings, a friend of the couple, later recounted David not being overly concerned and that he didn't appear to actively partake in the search for his wife. However, David claimed to have had sleepless nights after Brenda went missing. David also told the police that Brenda had been suffering from depression due to a recent bout of the flu. David moved out of his farm in 2014 into a more luxurious house. The new owners of his old property lived there happily until July 2019. Then one day the new owners wanted their septic tank serviced and cleaned out. When the servicing began, it was a spine-chilling sight for everyone as they discovered a lump of hair, a human skull, a pelvis, and thigh bones. They also found remnants of clothing, including half a pair of knickers, tights, a bra, the remains of some shoes, and a sweater. At the time of the discovery, a search was ongoing just 7 miles away for estate agent Susie Lamplew, who had disappeared in London. But police found no link between the remains and Miss Lamplew. It took over a year until detectives announced the bones had formerly been identified as those of Brenda's. David, who was then 88, was charged with the murder of Brenda. The police searched for hours in the garden and the garage. Although the owner moved in recently, he had a lot of stuff with him due to the massive size of the property. Many of the neighbors recalled that the missing Brenda Venables case was the most discussed in their village many years ago. The neighbors always perceived David as the non-interactive quiet man, but no one expected his silence to hold the details of a gruesome murder. During David's trial, details of his double life were revealed. Investigators discovered that he had been in a long-term on-off relationship with Lorraine Stiles since around 1967, who was his mother's nurse. During the investigation after Brenda's disappearance, 1984 Lorraine Stiles gave a few statements about David. In those she said, "He seemed quite composed and suddenly told me his wife had disappeared the night before." Lorraine claimed to be shocked at how calm he was when Brenda disappeared. During police interrogations, David tried to prove his innocence by claiming Fred West, a serial killer, could have been responsible for killing his spouse. But the possibility of Fred killing Brenda and putting her in a septic tank on her own property seemed too unrealistic to the authorities. David's lawyers tried to defend him by claiming that it would be absolute madness for him to have hidden his wife's body so close to their marital home. Although the prosecutors claimed Mr. David as the murderer, defense barrister Timothy Hannum questioned why David would sell his property if he knew his wife's body was in the septic tank. Timothy Hannum also stated David got his septic tank cleaned on more than one occasion. Timothy asked for a fair verdict of not guilty, suggesting that there was not sufficient evidence to convict David, but only assumptions mixed with guesswork and speculation. He also said the possibility of suicide should also be taken into consideration as the septic tank was the closest to Brenda's house. But there was one major flaw with that claim, as the lid of the septic tank was perfectly concealed and it was highly unlikely for a suicidal person to put the top back on before dying. David then claimed to have loved his wife Brenda very much, citing how active they were sexually. David even claimed the couple had intimate relations the night before her disappearance. But the court had other evidence, and they pulled up Brenda's psychiatric consultant's reports, which claimed that the couple had not slept together since 1968 and had not shared a bed for 3 years. Considering all these contradictions, the court convicted David of the murder of Brenda. A final plea was made by David's defendants to reduce his sentence, as he was already 88 years old. But the prosecutor rejected the appeal, stating concerns. Prosecutor Michael Burrows, QC, told jurors David wanted Brenda out of the way as he wanted to resume his long-standing affair with another woman. He also said David knew the septic tank was in a secluded location. It was for him almost the perfect hiding place. And for nearly 40 years it was, as he got away with murder. The family members of Brenda Venables released a statement to the press. The statement said, "We, Brenda's nieces and nephews, are relieved that today, after a wait of 37 years, at last there is justice for Brenda. David Venables can no longer get away with having murdered his wife, the hiding of her body, and all of his deceit, lies, and fabrications. Thanks for diving into another mystery with us. If you enjoyed unraveling the clues and chasing the truth, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and give us a thumbs up. Your support helps us bring you more thrilling cases and deep dives into the unknown.